I'm Corey Costello, and this is TehachaPod's Eye on the Capitol. Eye on the Capitol is an informative look at state and national issues that impact your life in Tehachapi. From new proposals, new laws, and even future legislation, we do the research and pass on that information to you while you go about your life. On today's episode, the presidential election is over. What happens between now and January 20th, 2025, when President-elect Donald Trump is sworn into office? What power does a president-elect have, and what does the current administration do during this time period? We appear to have Congressman Vince Fong once again elected to 2 seats. What happens once again in this 22nd District Assembly seat now that he's been elected into a full congressional term? Plus, the voters in California gave the nod and the heave-ho to several ballot propositions. What will each bring once implemented? It's a special post-election edition of Eye on the Capitol. We start on Capitol Hill, where the nation once again elected Donald Trump to a second term in office, albeit a non-consecutive second term, making Trump the first president since Grover Cleveland to pull off the feat. Trump, now president-elect after receiving over 300 electorate votes and the nation's popular vote, faces the task of reassembling his team in preparation for another 4 years in the White House, beginning in late January. So what does that timeline look like? The president-elect has roughly 10 weeks and is meeting with senior advisors to create his list for top cabinet positions before Inauguration Day. After that, the GOP-led Senate can start confirming the candidates for those positions that can be confirmed with a simple majority, although the administration has already requested recess appointments to save time. Those positions include White House Chief of Staff, National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Homeland Security Secretary, Director of National Intelligence, Attorney General, Secretary of Commerce, White House Press Secretary, White House Counsel, and Secretary of the Treasury. The president-elect has announced the following recommendations: Susie Wiles as the first female White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor, Tom Homan, Border Czar, Lee Zeldin, Environmental Protection Agency Administrator, Elise Stefanik, United Nations Ambassador, Mike Huckabee, U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Steve Witkoff, Special Ambassador for the Middle East, John Ratcliffe, CIA Director, Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary, Kristi Noem, Homeland Security Secretary. It's also been announced that the administration will create a council on government efficiency led by 2 private industry supporters of the president-elect, Elon Musk, and former Republican candidate for president and businessman Vivek Ramaswamy. The timeline for change in administration formally starts after the Government Service Administration declares an apparent winner a few days after the election, thereby releasing the funds appropriated by Congress for the transition, which will continue until Inauguration Day, when the president-elect takes the oath of office, and then the powers, immunities, and responsibility of the presidency are legally transferred to the new president. This process used to start on March 4th until the 20th Amendment to the Constitution was adopted in 1933, which moved that date to January 20th. Thus shortening the transition period. The Presidential Transition Act of 1963 provides the current rules, so to speak, to facilitate an orderly and peaceful transition of power. Under that law, major federal candidates receive classified national security briefings once their nomination is formalized by their party. They also receive certain transition services provided by the GSA, including office space, equipment, and payment of some related expenses. In addition to the cabinet positions previously mentioned, the president-elect is also the recipient of a revised edition of the Plum Book, which lists over 9,000 federal civil service leadership and support political appointment positions which an incoming president needs to review and fill or confirm. Some of the work is completed by the transition team, which includes considerations of key personnel from the outgoing and incoming president's staff, and includes vetting candidates, helping familiarize the incoming administration with the operations of the executive branch, and developing a comprehensive policy platform. In addition to this, the Electoral College will convene in mid-December to cast their votes for president and vice president based on the will of the voters and number of electorates in their particular state. In addition, the Trump administration, under the requirements of the Presidential Transition Act of 2019, had already established a transition council to facilitate the transition of power, an act required due to the inactivity in 2016 of Democrat nominee Hillary Clinton, who did not assemble her council until August of 2016. The 2019 Transition Act now requires a council to be established in June prior to an election year. The work has traditionally already started as former administration changes begin right after Election Day, as long as there are not any electoral disputes. This process lasts between 72 and 78 days leading up to inauguration and includes the staffing of the office of the president-elect. Current cabinet secretaries are expected to tender their resignations with effect on Inauguration Day. The same is true for deputy secretaries, although some are historically requested to stay on in an active role until confirmation by the Senate of a new secretary. Needless to say, there is a lot of work to be done before January 20th, 2025, and in the weeks after confirming the positions previously discussed. With the White House settled, what about California's long list of propositions on the latest ballot? How did they fare, and what is expected next? On the local election front, the counting continues in the state of California, and the county occurring with just over 20 days remaining until certification is required. Most of the ballot results tallied on election night were those from early voting mail-in ballots received by the registrar. Kern County has filed a semifinal official report on election night and continues doing so up until the certification deadline of December 6, 2024. It typically takes counties weeks to process and count all of the ballots due to vote-by-mail postmarks and same-day voter registrations. Election officials have just over 1 month to complete what is known as their official canvass, which includes extensive tallying, auditing, and certification work. Any ballot postmarked by Election Day and received by the county elections official no later than 7 days after the election can be counted. Per the California Secretary of State, each vote-by-mail ballot must be confirmed by the voter's registration status, verification of the voter's signature on the ballot envelope, and it must be ensured that each person did not vote elsewhere in the same election before the ballot is counted. Other than mail-in ballots, provisional ballots can also be counted after Election Day and includes those that have a conditional voter registration. Also, damaged ballots that cannot be read by machine must be remade by the elections official before they are counted. County elections have until December 3rd to report final official results of the presidential election to the Secretary of State and all other state contests by December 6th. The Secretary of State's deadline, as previously mentioned, is December 13th. On the state ballot proposition front, while some results are still being tabulated for ballot propositions, there was one resounding winner on election night, and that was Proposition 36, the initiative aimed at toughening punishments for serial theft and fentanyl dealing. The initiative thus far has shown a 3-to-1 ratio in favor, mirroring polling which showed over 70% support for the measure, which was opposed by California Governor Gavin Newsom, who elected, however, to not actively campaign against the measure due to its polling success and the support garnered by usual political allies, including the mayor of San Francisco, one of the hardest-hit areas for retail theft and fentanyl. This measure rolls back some of the provisions of Proposition 47 approved in 2014 by voters that set a $950 monetary threshold and reclassified low-level theft and drug charges from felonies to misdemeanors. At the time, it was touted as a way for California to depopulate its prisons to comply with the U.S. Supreme Court order and shift crimes caused by drug abuse and homelessness away from incarceration and into rehabilitation and mental health treatment. However, that did not end up being the case with a resounding increase in homelessness and open drug abuse in many California cities. Proposition 36 will address some of those issues by forcing drug treatment or incarceration for some drug offenses and puts repeat theft offenders in prison for a minimum of 3 years and cumulatively adds the value of stolen goods on prior offenses in order to do so. The governor and other critics claim it will cost tens of millions of dollars and even more for increased incarcerations. California has recently added 6,800 mental health treatment beds and has space in prisons due to closures of previous lower-level offender yards, including 2 at Tehachapi's California Correctional Institution. Proposition 36 passage was part of a common theme among California voters, and that's that they are rejecting the Democrats' soft-on-crime stance. Along with 36's approval, voters in Alameda County also successfully recalled their district attorney and Oakland Mayor Shang Tao by a 65 to 35% margin in each race. Alameda County DA Pamela Price ran on a platform of reforming the justice system by reducing sentences, no longer charging youth as adults, and increased prosecutions of police misconduct, which led to a spike in violence and property crimes. The recall effort was organized just 6 months into her 6-year term. Tao, the Oakland mayor, was also recalled for sharing a similar stance on crime and for her mismanagement of the Oakland Police Department. Organizers also claim her mishandling of the situation with the Oakland Athletics, which allowed the team to leave the Bay Area and move to Las Vegas, leaving the once thriving city without any professional sports franchises following the previous departures of the Raiders and Golden State Warriors. Alameda County Board of Supervisors will appoint a successor to Price until the next general election in 2026, while the president of the Oakland City Council will serve as mayor until the conclusion of a special election to serve out the remainder of Tao's term. In response, Governor Gavin Newsom has extended the CHP Retail Theft Crime Task Force rolled out last year in Oakland and Bakersfield, of which he highlighted his touted success on the latest edition of Eye on the Capitol. The program has not been extended in Kern County. Additionally, voters in Los Angeles County have also voted out soft-on-crime District Attorney George Gascon in favor of challenger Nathan Hochman, who won by a wide margin. Gascon took office in 2020 promising sweeping reforms, but was hampered with increases in crime and homelessness, of which Hochman, a former federal prosecutor and defense attorney, managed to connect directly to Gascon's policies during the campaign. Hochman was promised to remove politics from the LA District Attorney's office and focus on facts and the law. Gascon's tenure includes forbidding prosecutors from trying youth as adults, seeking the death penalty, and not prosecuting a host of misdemeanors. In addition, California voters appear to have rejected Proposition 6, which would have ended involuntary servitude and mandatory work requirements for state prisoners. The proposition was part of a reparations package put forth for descendants of African Americans enslaved in the U.S. California is one of 8 states in the nation that still allow for involuntary servitude as criminal punishment. On the other statewide propositions, Proposition 2 appears to have majority support. It allows for the state to borrow up to $10 billion to modernize K-12 classrooms and community colleges. Proposition 4 also appears to be heading towards approval, which allows another $10 billion in borrowing to address the response to climate change in the form of clean drinking water projects and wildfire protection. This bond will be repaid at the rate of $400 million per year for the next 40 years for a total of $16 billion, according to the Legislative Analyst's Office in Sacramento. Proposition 5, which would have lowered the threshold for local bond measures for housing and infrastructure projects from 2/3 majority to 55%, appears to be heading towards defeat, as is Proposition 33, which would have expanded the ability for cities and counties to enact rent control or limiting the rental rates issued by landlords. Proposition 32, which would have raised the minimum wage $2 by 2026, is also on the track to fail. Proposition 34, which requires a certain subset of doctors to spend revenue from discount drug programs on direct patient care, is also passing, while Proposition 35, which seeks to provide permanent funding to Medi-Cal programs via a tax on measured insurance plans, also appears to be heading towards an approval. Voters also appear to have approved Proposition 3, which cleans up the language in the California Constitution that defines marriage between a man and a woman and aligns with California law allowing same-sex marriage. Congressman Vince Fong appears to be heading to his own 2-year term in Congress following his election in the 32nd Congressional District, but Fong, who appeared on the ballot twice after filing for the vacancy left by Kevin McCarthy in Congress, appears to have won 2 races as his name remained on the ballot for his 22nd State Assembly District seat as well, and was even listed as a current assemblyman, although he gave up that seat back in May when he was sworn into Congress. Despite not campaigning for the 22nd District Assembly seat, Fong still won the election to both seats. Fong will now have to refuse the assembly seat following the certification of the election. The Secretary of State will once again wait for the governor to call for yet another special election, which will be held not more than 140 days following the election certification. Costs of the election will fall on both Kern County and Tulare County, of which the assembly seat represents. Ken Weir was the only other candidate on the ballot for the seat, but was unable to receive the majority of the vote. Recent state laws now close the election loophole that allowed Fong to be on the ballot for both positions. Fong previously sued the Secretary of State to be allowed on the ballot for the congressional seat, exploiting the language in California's open primary rules, which have now been amended. McCarthy's resignation from Congress came after Fong had already been certified as a primary candidate for Assembly earlier this year. Also back home, as results continue to be tabulated in Kern County, the 2nd District Supervisor race continues to point to former Bakersfield City Councilman and retired Department of Justice investigator Chris Parlier, who holds a nearly 5,000 vote lead in the district, which spans from Taft to southeast portion of Kern County. This race is to close out the 2 years remaining on the term of former Supervisor Zach Scribner, who resigned earlier this year following allegations of abuse in his Tehachapi home. The closest race locally is that for the 5th District Supervisor, in which incumbent Leticia Perez holds just a 4-vote lead over challenger Kimberly Salas. California Governor Gavin Newsom has not taken the Republican victory lightly, also calling for a special session of the state legislature in early December to Trump-proof California policies against the president-elect. Newsom has claimed that a Trump victory and potential mass deportation of illegal immigrants in California will burden the state's economy. The governor is in Washington, D.C. this week discussing ways to prevent Trump policies from impacting California with the Biden administration. Via a Zoom call with Campaign for Democracy supporters, Newsom appeared both worried about California policies being challenged at the federal level and had this to say about the second Trump administration.
But this time, I expect him to be a little sharper on the follow-through, not just the rhetoric. Trump 2.0, I think, is going to be, from his perspective, aiming to be more effective than 1.0. There was a scattershot quality to it. He lost a lot of those lawsuits on procedural grounds. A lot of them never were addressed the merits. These federal courts have been stacked, not just the Supreme Court. Don't forget about those appellate courts, the lower courts, not just the Supreme Court. And so you'll have a different composite, different makeup within these courts. And so we're preparing a litigation posture that is going to be a little more aggressive, a little bit more sober. We're not naive about the areas where he'll attack. Obviously, women's rights broadly defined, not just access to abortion, but we're all concerned about access to contraception. ComStack, I mean, we're thinking through all of those things. We're looking as well at building partnerships. You know, there's that old African proverb, you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go together. So we're looking at building alliances with other states. We did that on reproductive care, and we think that's a great model. We want to expand that. We're really proud California leading in that space. Obviously on broader issues of democracy and the environment, I think we can do even more in that space. We have a U.S. Climate Alliance where we're doing just that, but we want to expand that further. Litigation, posture, and strategy. But look, I think he's going to come harder. He's going to come faster. Executive orders, day one. We're taking him at his word. I'm taking him at his promises. And, I think just as it relates to mass deportation, where he doubled down on that just yesterday and reported today with Kristen Walker in a conversation she had. What state is more impacted by that than California? The impact that would have on the economy, the chilling impact that would have on the economy, the tentpole of the U.S. economy, California's innovation, not just Central Valley, but Silicon Valley. You cannot understate that.
When it came to immigration, Newsom hinted that December 2nd doesn't just start a special session, but that he has, quote, a trick up his sleeve. While Newsom awaits that, the California Air Resources Control Board has approved new regulations resulting in even tougher climate regs for vehicles and gas in California, which is anticipated to cost Californians dearly at the pump. Last Friday, the California Air Resources Control Board voted 12-2 in a 12-hour session, including testimonies from both sides, to further transition California away from fossil fuels and toward other modes of transportation such as hydrogen, biodiesel, and electric by amending California's low-carbon fuel standards. Previous standards required fossil fuels to reduce carbon intensity of their products 20% from 2010 standards by 2030. The new amendments passed Friday, despite many objections from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, will now require a 30% reduction by 2030 and a 95% reduction by 2045. Analysts believe this could lead to price increases as high as 45 cents per gallon. The board refused a petition with 15,000 signatures, which asked them to delay the vote until the true cost of the standards could be analyzed. Members of the board, much of which was appointed by Governor Newsom, refuted claims that the new standards would increase gas prices. One of the dissenters was former Kern County Democrat State Senator Dean Flores, who was appointed by Assemblymen to the board. Flores voiced concern about California already having the second highest gas prices in the nation and went on to say he wasn't sure in good conscience how members of the board could not believe they were the cause of those prices. Flores voted against the proposals. State Assemblyman Tom Lackey, who represents the Antelope Valley, was also vocal against the proposal.
If you approve this measure, California drivers will pay over $2 more a gallon than other drivers throughout the country.
A 2023 document by CARB staff anticipates an increase of 47 cents per gallon next year and a $1.80 increase by 2045. Other members of the board refer to the 2023 document as, quote, outdated.
The proposed LCFS amendments are designed to support this transition away from fossil fuels by ensuring investment in both electric charging and hydrogen fueling infrastructure. CARB considers the 47-cent estimate cited by many critics of the program to also be an overestimate. Any claims that LCFS is somehow responsible for high gas prices is misleading at best and not supported by the historical data.
California policies in the name of climate change will also soon be coming to your recreational vehicle. The 2025 standards for the Advanced Clean Truck Regulations will create a near-total ban on new motorhome sales in the state and states that also follow California Air Resources Control Board standards. While the regulation does not specifically ban motorhome sales, the ACT regulation mandates manufacturers of medium and heavy-duty vehicles to sell an increasing percentage of zero-emission vehicles each year. This has led chassis manufacturers to halt sales of traditional internal combustion engine chassis for motorhomes in California, stemming from the lack of EV chassis suitable for motorhomes. Since 2020, the RV Industry Association has been working with CARB on the ACT regulations through conversations directly with CARB staff, as well as written and oral testimony at multiple public hearings. When CARB filed its proposal amendments earlier this year, the RV industry met with CARB staff to discuss the impact on the industry. The association also submitted comments laying out the negative impact of the regulation on the motorhome industry. CARB did not make any further amendments which would alleviate the problem of motorhome manufacturers being told by chassis manufacturers they'd not be able to supply internal combustion engine chassis for sale in California, since they could not offset their zero-emission deficits by sales of EV motorhome chassis. While the RV industry is continuing to work with manufacturers, dealers, and CARB to find a solution, if nothing changes, motorhomes will not be able to sold or registered in California beginning in 2025. The exact date is yet to be determined. That's the latest in Eye on the Capitol. If you have a question or would like more information about one of the topics covered or have an idea for a future episode, email us at media@TehachapiCityHall.com. Until next time, you keep living up Tehachapi, and we'll keep an eye on the Capitol.